Okay, gang, this particular video is going to show you the elements that you need to include in your conclusions for your research papers. In Edmodo, in the folder Writing the Paper, you will see the framework for a research paper document. Pull that up. I'm looking over the particular section that says conclusion. I also pulled up Wyatt Boomhauer's paper from last year, and I'm going to show you how Wyatt used these guidelines in his particular conclusion. Okay, now with your conclusion, as long as you include all four of these main components, you can include them however you want in your particular research paper as long as you have all four in them. One thing I would suggest though is the following. If you are going to restate your thesis statement, either begin your conclusion with a restatement of your thesis statement or end it. You can even combine a few of these elements. You can combine restating your thesis statement and a call for action, which Boomhauer does, and I'll show you how he does it here in a second. But you can do that as well. Okay, as long as you have these main components though in your conclusion, you're going to be good to go. So with that said, restating your thesis statement as it says there, don't repeat it word for word. Echo it. Remind us of your main argument of your entire research paper. Just don't do it in a word for word fashion. Okay, from there also summarize your main points. Don't repeat the topic sentences word for word. That'll look cheeky and it'll look fairly fundamental and elementary, to be honest. So you can summarize your main points or several main points in a sentence or two. From there, it's always good to bring up the opposing viewpoints and explain, however, how the reader should align with your position. So just again remind the reader of some main counter arguments that are out there, but then respond to them as well in your particular conclusion. And last but not least, develop a call for action, meaning why do you believe the system needs to be changed based off of your particular research? Based off of everything that you have researched, everything that you've looked over, read about, written about also. Why do you think this system, the status quo, the way things are in society today, why should they be changed based off of your own opinions over the particular subject? And in doing so, essentially, by calling this quote-unquote call for action, you're asking for a positive change to take place in our status quo, in the way things are being operated in society today. Okay, so let's go ahead and look at it here a little bit. So essentially, what we're going to do is we're going to start with Wyatt's particular conclusion here. Okay, and what's interesting here is Wyatt begins his particular conclusion by summarizing his particular main points in his particular conclusion. Okay, and then he also blends in opposing viewpoints as well. So let's go back to his particular conclusion. I'm looking at it right here, and of course I fly up about 2 pages. Let me go back down. Here we go. So this first particular sentence says the following. The main argument that the war in Afghanistan has been concluded is that America has killed Osama bin Laden and has essentially cut off the head of the snake. Even President Obama told West Point cadets in a speech that Al-Qaeda has been decimated and Osama bin Laden is no more. So what's interesting is he begins his particular conclusion with actually a counter argument. Okay, and then from there what he does is this particular counter argument is followed by his analysis. He says the following. The statement gives a feeling that just because bin Laden is dead, that Al-Qaeda is finishing our war on terrorism in Afghanistan is complete. Then he gets into a summary of some of his main points. Al-Qaeda, in reality, is still going strong. It still has the capabilities to conduct attacks in Afghanistan and possibly farther. And then he continues on with his main points of his particular arguments. The death of one man does not constitute as the end of a terrorist organization or end of a fierce war that is still being fought today. And then he gives a little nice example to go along with his particular main points. For example, if our president would happen to be killed in a terrorist attack, America will not simply fall into ruins. However, America would more than likely rally and fight much harder. And then he continues on with some of his main points in his particular paper. The same is true for Al-Qaeda. More than likely, they will pull tighter together and fight even harder than before. Last but not least, what he does is he goes ahead and he combines his thesis statement and call to action together in his particular last sentence. So let's look at it. Therefore, our mission in Afghanistan is not complete, and operation should continue until it is mission accomplished. So basically, what he is saying is that in his particular thesis statement, he mentioned that the war and operations in Afghanistan should not cease. That is echoed right here in this particular part of his last statement. This is a reminder to his particular reader of his main argument, his central thesis. And then from there, he gives a call to action. Operation should continue until it is mission accomplished. His call to action is that we should essentially continue our particular operations and continue our presence within Afghanistan in order to totally and completely snuff out the root of the problem and the root of these terrorist organizations, so to speak. So he combines it, and you can do that as well. As long as you have these main elements in your particular conclusion, you're going to be good to go. Okay? You can play with these elements. You can combine elements. As long as I see them in your conclusion, you're going to be fine. If you're really linear, and if you want to follow them step by step, you can do that as well. You can start your conclusion by restating your thesis statement, and then summarizing your main points. And then, again, just bringing up quickly the opposing viewpoints, but explaining why they should align with your position. And then last but not least, developing a call for action. You could do that as well if you want. That's perfectly fine. If you don't want to do that, and if you want to combine some of these particular elements together, or put them a little out of order, you can do that as well. The only thing I would suggest would be the call for action generally should be the last thing you have in your particular conclusion, okay? But if you want to combine your thesis statement with the call for action as well and put it towards the end of your particular conclusion, you totally can completely do that, okay? So to review, what Wyatt did with his was he used these particular elements and he played with them a little bit. He started off again his particular conclusion with a counter argument, and then give some information from President Obama. If you want to use a piece or two of research in your conclusion, you can, but don't make it research heavy because you want to wrap it up. Make sure the research flows along with what you're saying. So he starts it off with a counter argument. He goes ahead and he explains it somewhat, but then from there he responds to it. So much like it says here, reinforce your credibility by addressing opposing viewpoints and explain why readers should align to your position. That's what he does in this particular section of the paper. And then from there, he begins to summarize his main points as well. And then last but certainly not least, he reminds us of his particular thesis statement. He echoes it. And then from there, he gives us a call for action, meaning what he wants the audience to do or think after reading his particular paper. So with your call to action, you want them to at least think a different way, rather, in a different way in which they weren't thinking before. You are trying to convince them to side with your particular opinion, or at least give it some thought. Okay? So that's about it right there. You can play with these elements if you want. If you're linear, you can just go step by step right here, and you'll be good to go. Okay? So those are the major components of a conclusion for your research papers.